All right, my first day back in Missoula, Montana. I was here in September, and I want to say officially Missoula is now my favorite city. So earlier during the pandemic, I was trying to keep tabs on when we might reopen the border. There's another place around the world that used to be my favorite city, but now Missoula. I had a very good experience with a couple of my neighbors. So actually, I think it's the first time in my life. My first day moving into an apartment, and a neighbor says hi to me and introduces himself. So you would never get that kind of vibe over in Seattle, or worse yet in New York, right? People are just a number over in New York. Like I said earlier, one of the nice things I like about the mountain area, right, is that we get accepted for who we are, right? There's a lot of live and let live. So one of the biggest challenges I run into is that, well, I guess I don't know if it's because of my choice of careers. I often work with other people who have a difference in their status, right? A lot of my coworkers are either married or they're in a committed relationship. And not to say that who's right or who's wrong, but they can't see outside of that, right? And that's a big problem, right? Their whole philosophy of what they do day in and day out revolves around their situation, right? Here in, actually, I worked briefly when I was in Helena this was August. I worked briefly at a tutoring center, and I think most of my coworkers were also in committed relationships, maybe not married, because those are younger people. And I didn't run into the same problem. People accepted me for who I am. People accepted that I have different eating habits. I didn't get pushed into eating something. People understood. And so I think it's a matter of the demographics, and which is kind of weird because in Seattle, we had one of the biggest Black Lives Matter protests of last year. We have a lot of discussion about marriage equality. I think Seattle was one of the first places around the country that legalized other kinds of marriage, right? And yet they can only follow what's written down in the law, right? Anything that's not written down, like singles or dietary preferences, they get completely lost. I think that's a big problem. A lot of times we get so used to government telling us how to live our lives, we forget common sense. I think that's the big problem over here. Here in Montana, there's probably a lot less of that, right? Oh, so back home in Seattle, see, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had an eviction moratorium, right? You could stay in your place and they can't raise the rent, and I think even if you fall behind on your rent, they can't kick you out. I had the money. The problem was that my lease was supposed to end last March. What had happened was I booked into an Airbnb, and I was just like everybody else. I was expecting the pandemic to be over in 2 weeks, so I only booked it to the end of March. And well, obviously we know what happened, and so I tried to extend that, and my landlord was not very flexible about that. I guess she was also worried about, well, she was upset that I got such a good deal, probably, right, because of travel was stopped for some number of weeks, and so wasn't thinking outside the box. See, when the government tells you what to do, a lot of times people lose their common sense bone, if you will. I think that's what happens in Seattle. Here in Montana, I don't think we have nearly as many equality kind of laws, right? The gay marriage and all that. And I think we might have had the moratorium during the crisis, but probably not as not as expansive as over in Seattle, and so people have to actually think, right? So I think here in Montana we don't ban smoking in bars, but very few bars actually allow smoking, right? So I think it's people have more good judgment here that they've lost in Seattle. They've atrophied their good judgment over in Seattle. I think that's the big problem. So that anything that is not covered, you get the short end of the stick, right? That's what I think. Anyway, so Missoula, I'm gonna say, is my favorite city in the world now. Because earlier today when I got here, all of a sudden I didn't want to think about traveling around the world anymore. I mean, I guess I could save a lot of money living in another country during this lockdown period, but there's more to life than money. You know, I can meet somebody here, and even when I do go back to Seattle, we're only like a 5-hour drive away. If I traveled over there, you know, that's another story. I might make some connections during the lockdown, but it will be over once it's over, right? Unless I do end up leaving the country, like how I threatened to earlier in the year when we had the insurgency and the threat of the mandatory vaccines. You know, if in terms of the vaccines, if they do make it mandatory, I think I need to speak up for myself and for others in my boat. I think it would be selfish for me to leave the country to avoid that. Yeah, I'm not thinking so much about that anymore. I think it's more important to make long-term connections. All right, so I spend my first day here in Missoula, and I might even make it permanent. I mean, we have Montana University here. I'll see if there's any careers that are possible over there, and that might be that, right? I really love the feeling of belonging over here. All right, thanks for watching.